Hello everyone. Today's lesson is on reading song charts and arrangements. This is the culmination of the last few lessons in which I taught you how to read music on the staff, as well as guitar tab and guitar chord charts. In this example, you're going to see all of those together at the same time. The piece of music's title will usually be here at the top, often followed by a subtitle. And over here, sometimes you'll have the name of the composer. If we zoom in a little bit, we can look a little bit more closely. The first thing to take note of is this symbol here. This is telling us how fast we should be playing our music. This is measured in beats per minute. So really what it's saying is 80 beats per minute. In some music, you might see an Italian term. That Italian term is also a classical way of telling you how fast to play the music. The next thing that we should take note of is over here on the staff. You can see that there is a treble clef and a bass clef. This indicates to me that I'm playing in the grand staff. The next thing we might notice is the time signature. Here we can see that the music is labeled 4/4. That would indicate to us that this is in 4/4 time. Next thing that I might take note of is the accidentals. So here we can see the key signature is being marked with one accidental. And that accidental lives at a specific point on this line here. And that tells me that this is an F sharp. I know that the key of G major has one sharp in it, and that sharp is F sharp. So it's safe to say I'm either in the key of G major or its relative minor key, E minor. One thing's for certain, every time I see that letter F marked on the staff, I can assume that it is an F sharp. And that's important for us to know that once we see the sharp marked in the beginning, every time we see that note afterwards, it will be read as a sharp, F sharp. So the next thing for us to look at would probably be the bar lines. For example, here, this is telling us that this is one bar. So what that means is that this entire section here, everything that exists within this area is one bar. I mean, we can extend that down to here because there's all together. So that's one bar. And then the next section here is another bar. You'll see that there are some indicators here with multiple dots and also here. So what this is indicating is that everything that happens within this entire section here should be repeated. As you can see, the dots are facing in one direction here, and then they're facing in another direction here. So that tells us that the things within these two are what's going to be repeated. And as a default, they're usually repeated 2 times unless otherwise marked. For example, you might see a mark that says 4 times, and then you would know that you're supposed to repeat it 4 times. Otherwise, as a default, 2 times. So while we're looking at it, I'm going to go ahead and zoom out a little bit, and you'll notice that on this side, there are some more dots facing in this direction. That means that another repeating pattern will soon begin in that area as well. We'll get to that soon. Okay, back to where we were. Now let's take a look at the notes themselves and start to examine them. So as you can see here, we've got 4 quarter notes laid out, and then we've got a tie, of course. A good way to tell that we're in 4/4 is that there are 4 quarter notes. Another thing that you can see here underneath in the bass clef are chords. When notes are stacked on top of each other like this, we read it as a chord. So right away you can tell that this is some kind of rhythmic chord progression. You also see next to it a series of rests. So we can surmise from that rest, chord, rest, chord, rest, chord, rest, chord. And if you look here, you'll notice that above it, the musical note that exists in the other clef is in between. So this is probably indicating to us some kind of alternating pattern. Okay, let's do a little counting now. We're going to isolate different regions. So here we're going to count this 1, 2, 3, and then we'll go 4 onto the next beat, right? Because this crosses the bar. If we look at the chords underneath, we'll see that this is 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. What that means is we're playing on the offbeat, on the and of each beat. So if we read them together, it would go like note, chord, note, chord, note, chord, note, chord. So in between the lines of the grand staff, we also have these words here. So what's happening is that basically this upper melody is functioning as what would be the vocal line, and this lower part here is functioning as what would be the chords of the song. So kind of like the arrangement is telling you the basics of the song right here. So in order for us to know exactly what's happening, we got to start to label these notes. Let's do that next. Okay, so here I've laid out the melody notes. Now, what about these chords underneath? So the notes of this chord here are E, G, B. And if we know our triads, we know that that is an E minor chord. Interestingly enough, the E minor chord is also shown up here. So we could surmise from that this area is going to be using an E minor chord, see, in this section, and that this down here is going to be the rhythm for that E minor chord. Now we have not only a specific voicing that we can use, but also we have a rhythm pattern. One thing that we should note, though, is that this style of triad that's in order, right? It's going E, G, B, is not the same as this up here, because guitar chords use different spelling and the notes are arranged in a different order. So this here is actually very piano specific. Okay, now if we zoom out a little bit more, we can see the entire melody for this section here. And we can see that it starts with an E minor chord, and then at the bar line, there seems to be an indicator that it switches. So if we direct our attention down here, we can see that there are a different set of chords with that same sort of rhythmic pattern as this side. So that could tell us that this is probably A minor over and over again in that same rhythmic pattern. So now we have an idea of this entire section. I want you to take a look over here. See this A? So that A is actually denoting this whole area here, which we are calling the A section. This is called a rehearsal mark. So before we move on to the B section, we have to make sure that we know the entire A section. So let's take a look at the guitar tab here on the bottom. So there's a few things that I'm going to draw your attention to on this guitar tab. The first thing being that there is a mark indicated up here with a big long indicator. So this is for palm muting, which indicates that this entire section, both of these bars, are going to be palm muted. That's what that's telling us. We also have another little note here that would be very guitar specific. It says distort. So this might be an indicator for you to make sure that your distortion pedal is activated for this section. And, it might turn off later. So that's a good note that you might see on a piece of music. Then beyond that, we also have the tab with these rhythmic indicators underneath. So these rhythmic indicators are mimicking the rhythm of this section here above. Later on, they switch to a longer duration here. Let's take a listen. Notice how it repeated twice. Notice how the guitar was palm muted. And this also included the upper chords, the piano chords, as well as the guitar tablature, as though these are four separate parts in an ensemble. It can be intimidating to look at a piece of music like this, but do what I'm doing and just zoom in on sections. And eventually you'll start to be able to do this pretty rapidly, and you'll feel a lot more confident in your abilities. All right, let's take a look at a little bit more of the music now. Okay, so from here forward, we already see that there are some indicators that a repeat is coming. So if we follow along, we can eventually come to this area here, and we can see that this is where the B section repeats. And since there is no mark telling us how many times it repeats, we are going to assume that it repeats 2 times. So we got that figured out. If we compare this section here to this previous section, then we know it's the same thing, so we don't have to do any new deciphering. So let's take a look at the tab. All of the tab exists on one string, which is the high E string. And it's the 2nd fret, 3rd fret, 5th fret, and then 7th fret. And we have some indications here which are telling us a rhythm. Luckily for us, the rhythm that is present here is the exact same rhythm as above, which is just 4 quarter notes. So this time, let's try and figure out what the notes are based on the tab. F sharp, G, A, B. Luckily, the tab indicates to us which F we should be playing. And we know that because the 2nd fret is F sharp, we should be playing an F sharp. The next thing I want you to take note of is this little number right here. It can be a little hard to see, but basically what that is telling me is that I am at the 4th measure or the 4th bar. So if we counted each one of these, 1, 2, 3, this would be our 4th. And they don't always number every single one because sometimes the first few can be pretty obvious. But if you're ever confused about where you are in the piece of music, you can always refer to that number. So you have 2 rehearsal marks that can potentially help you. You could say, I'm at the B section, bar 4. This is a good way for you to communicate to other people you're playing with. Okay, now we want to make sure that we take our time and pay attention to what's happening with the melody and with the chord progression. So let's take a look at the chords first. Up here we see A minor. So at bar 4, A minor is being utilized, and we can see that same familiar A minor pattern. So that's helpful. And it looks like right after that, we've got another chord, E minor, and we've got that familiar pattern again. So it seems like the rhythm guitar is doing something pretty consistent, and it's not going to deviate too much. If we go further from there, we got A minor doing that same pattern again. Okay, and it looks like the piano part here is doing the same thing that it was doing up here, which is the same thing that the tabs are doing right here. So as you can see that some of these patterns and little tidbits of music start to repeat in different ways. So that brings me on to this section of the melody here. This section of the melody is different in some way, but also is similar. We see 4 quarter notes, with the 4th one being tied. I think the difference is that this up here is just a higher octave. It's the same pattern, the same melody, but written in 2 separate octaves. Let's move on to the tab underneath. So this tablature underneath is actually playing the same melody here. So they're mirroring each other. One thing I want to point out is that consistently we've seen E minor, A minor, E minor, A minor, back and forth. So that's actually indicating to me that we are actually in the key of E minor. Okay, let's take a look at this guitar part here. So there's a lot going on in these tabs, so I want to focus our attention on that right now. So first thing I'm going to point out is the rhythm that we see here. So we've got our quarter note rhythm, and this rhythm is mimicking the rhythm of this line here. So there's 2 ways for us to look at it. We can look at it down here, or we can look at the notes above. But there are some specific things about guitar technique that are also being written in. For example, here, this is the symbol for hammer-on. So that's telling me that the 2nd to 3rd fret, I'm going to be doing a hammer-on in between. And that's followed by the slide indicator here. So we also see that there is a kind of glissando or slide from the 3rd fret to the 7th fret. And that's followed by an open note. But that open note is tied. And that's that same thing that we're seeing mimicked here. So if we keep going, we're going to see another hammer-on here. Then we have our open E string, high E string again. And then finally we end on the 3 with a little indicator above, which is our vibrato. The vibrato is also noted here, but that's probably not possible on a piano, but it could be on a vocal. So for the next bar, we've got a series of triplets. Here's one, there's another, another, and another, for giving us total 4 triplets. And then here in the tablature, it's telling us what notes to play for those individual triplets. You're going to count those triplet, 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 triplet. And then finally, we have the indicator here, which is telling us that that section, yeah, is going to repeat. Let's take a listen to this section. The glissando sounds a bit goofy with the MIDI, but it is a good way to reference and listen back to what we're creating. Let's go ahead and move on to the next section. Now let's move on to the C and D section. Everything looks pretty similar, E minor and A minor, that same ascending vocal pattern or melody pattern, but the guitar is different. So let's take a look at the electric guitar and see what's going on. The first thing that I would take note of is the fact that it's labeled clean here. So that indicates to me that at section C here, we are going to switch over to the clean. Just as before, we have our repeat lines here and here. So we know that since there are no indicators, this whole section is going to repeat twice. Then let's take a look at the rhythm. So the rhythm is interestingly similar. We have these rhythmic marks on the tab, which seem to mimic the rhythmic marks of this pattern above. So is it just copying the piano? Is it the same thing? Let's check the chord spelling. EGB, EGB. Huh, so they're both spelled the same way, and they're even in order on the guitar, but they're octaves apart. Let's look at the next section over here. This chord, on the other hand, is different. While the rhythm is the same, this is more of a power chord. It only has 2 notes. And really, if we want it to be consistent, we should probably write these like this. Adding these extra X's onto the tablature tells us which strings need to be muted on the guitar. So it's giving us more technique information as well as rhythmic information. Let's take a listen. Okay, now let's take a look at the final section, or the D section. Here we have some chord changes and we have some variations that we did not see before. The first thing that I'll point to are the chords in the piano chart here, written in the bass clef. This first G major 7 chord is lasting for the whole bar. So that would be counted as 4 beats. 1, 2, 3, 4. This second chord here, a D7, lasts for half of the bar. And then finally, we see that the second half of the bar is taken up by a G major 7, which is marked here in the treble clef. Let's go ahead and label the notes of the melody line now. What happens if we compare that to the pattern listed here in the tablature? Well, it turns out they're the same notes. So it looks like these are both arpeggios of a G major 7 chord. My guess is this here is also going to mimic the one above it. Yeah, there we have it. Okay, now let's spell all these chords. So as you can see, this arpeggio that exists here is the same as here. And that one repeats. And it's also the same notes as this chord that's being held out underneath, which is also the same as this chord that's being suggested here, except of course the spelling is different. And then our rhythmic notation is down here, giving us eighth notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And if we move on to the second bar, we have a variation in which the chord being arpeggiated is different and for a shorter amount of time. So here we have 1 and 2 and for the arpeggio. For the half note, we have 1, 2, and then the same for the half note above, that chord that's being held out. So interestingly, this last chord here is spelled the same way as this chord above. And I wanted to show you that, and I kind of wanted to rap on that because it's not often that guitar chords are in a nice clean order like they might be on a piano. But I wanted to show you that that does happen every once in a while. All right, let's take a listen. All right, now let's do the whole thing in context. I hope this was helpful for you, and I'll see you next time.